Hi, you are listening to the Usapang Sosyal online at www.pssc.org.ph. Usapang Sosyal is brought to you by the Philippine Social Science Council. The PSSC is a nonprofit organization of professional social science associations and social science research and instructional institutions in the Philippines. It has 14 regular member associations representing various social science disciplines and around 40 associate member institutions. Welcome to the second episode, which will focus on community pantries that have formed a movement in the Philippines. I am Athena Shireen Ash Presto, a sociology instructor at the University of the Philippines, Diliman, and I will be your moderator for this episode. We have two very special guests for today, namely Dr. Roland Tolentino and Professor Danilo Arao. Dr. Roland Tolentino is a faculty of the University of the Philippines Film Institute and former dean of the UP College of Mass Communication. He has taught at the Osaka University, National University of Singapore, and University of California, Berkeley. His research interests include Philippine literature, popular culture, cinema and media, interfacing national and transnational issues. He writes fiction and creative nonfiction and is a fellow and director of the Likhaan UP Institute of Creative Writing. He is the chair of the National Committee on Cinema and commissioner for the Subcommission on the Arts of the National Committee for Culture and the Arts, and is a board member of the Film Development Council of the Philippines. He is also a member of the Manunuri ng Pelikulang Pilipino, the Congress of Teachers and Educators for National and Democracy, and Alter Media. On the other hand, Professor Danilo Arao is an associate professor of the Department of Journalism at the University of the Philippines College of Mass Communication in Diliman, Quezon City. He is also a faculty affiliate of the Center for International Studies at UP Diliman and a special lecturer of the Department of Journalism, College of Mass Communication at the Polytechnic University of the Philippines, Santa Mesa. He is the editor of Media Asia, a peer-reviewed journal published by the Asian Media Information and Communication Center and Aldrich Taylor and Francis Group. As regards his work as a journalist, he writes a weekly column in Filipino titled Contexto for Pinoy Weekly. His weekly column is co-posted in Bulat-Lat Media, where he also serves as associate editor. He is also a board secretary of Kodao Publications and board chair of Alipato Media Center. Thank you so much for joining us, Sir Roland, Sir Danilo. How are you both doing?
We're fine, pandemic notwithstanding.
So sa level ng pandemic discourse ay so long as humihinga ka pa, you're doing well.
Totoo. Nagbago na ang pamantayan natin ng well-being dahil sa pandemya. So our topic for today is about community pantries. That has been a huge issue in the Philippines for the past weeks. So I guess my first question for you, Sir Roland and Sir Danny, would be, how would you describe these community pantries?
The community pantries are initiatives from the ground level. No, it just took one woman, si Ana Patricia noon of the College of Fine Arts, to establish a 3-shelf kind of bamboo trolley, no, in Maginhawa, that became social media, not just a social media, but a real kind of sensation, primarily because it was addressing a basic human need among Filipinos, and this was the issue of food and hunger. No? So nagkaroon ng initiative at anong count na, nasa 850 na ang community pantries nito, and some through social media, which we are also finding out, some of these community pantries, especially the Maginhawa hub, has been sustaining itself for the past couple of weeks or nearing a month of success. No? So it has been replicated, ito model na to, at malinaw ang inspiration ay itong Maginhawa pantry ni Pantry.
In addition to what Dr. Tolentino said, the concept of the community pantry is nothing new in the context of the pandemic, because if we may recall, last year, there were community kitchens set up nationwide. It just didn't get that much media traction for reasons that perhaps we'll talk about later on. But what's significant about last year was that even the community kitchens initiated by many cause-oriented groups were the targets of red tagging, and it even resulted in the killing of Jory Portia. Of course, we're not saying that it's the setting up of the community kitchen that caused the murder of Portia. It was mainly to do with his activism, but during the time that he was killed last year, he was very busy with the community kitchen. And lest we forget, the Marikina 10, the 10 individuals arrested last year were also setting up community kitchens in our area in Marikina.
So you mentioned, both of you, that this is nothing new. We have some on-ground movements already in the past, especially as regards to the COVID-19 pandemic. But what makes, aside from its social media presence and its virality, what makes community pantries different from other on-ground and collective movements that we have established during the pandemic? We already have, as Sir Ron mentioned, 850 community pantries at napakarami nun, spanning the whole Philippines from north to south. So what makes the community pantries different?
From my end, I think it's really a kind of platform that is that came in at the time after a year, more than a year of the lockdown. Parang ito yung nakita ng mga tao na a kind of initiative that is doable from their end to be able to contribute 5 pesos or 10 pesos in terms of GCash contribution, whatever they have this excess in their own pantries, no? And share it with their respective communities. No? So it's a platform that even K-pop fans, no? Like kayo sila ng network of their community pantries in support of the kind of social advocacy in which a lot of the K-pop stars are also involved in. The Catholic Church also established a community pantry. There's a Bible pantry somewhere out there also distributing Bibles as a kind of relief. No? Kasi lahat tayo disgruntled na sa longest and strictest and probably the most ineffective lockdown in the world. Kaya nung nakakita ng opening, a kind of silver lining na sa pagkasadlak natin dito sa health emergency mismanagement ng gobyerno natin, and that's where the coalition of creative energies and generosity of the human spirit came in.
Of course, we also have to consider the fact that this is the first year. It's been more than a year since the lockdown. So right now, there's a basis for comparison. If in the past, the so-called silent majority would want to give, some latitude or be a bit more liberal about, for lack of a better word, with the current administration, right now, as Dr. Tolentino said, there is collective disgust because things are supposed to be improving, but in fact, they're not. So if we were to answer my previous query, a while ago regarding why is it that the community kitchen did not gain that much traction compared to the community pantries now, it's because of the anger of the people. Things are supposed to be improving, but actually things are getting worse. So the pantries would seek to provide that immediate need to assuage the hunger of majority of the people, or at least those areas where pantries are being set up. So that's one. Second, social media would have to be a primary factor here because the pantry of Ms. Non was picked up by many social media users. And of course, the so-called legacy media or old media, again, for lack of a better term, print, radio, and television would pick it up. So it's the convergence of both social media and print, radio, and television working together to amplify that particular issue. So I think much as this is a people's initiative, we also cannot deny that it's also a media creation, which is good, by the way, in the sense that it provides, some solution, no matter how palliative it may be, to the problems we're facing right now. And without preempting our discussion later on, that would partly explain why the government response has been a bit iffy iffy in the sense that on one hand, even the PNP and the MMDA would set up their own community pantries, but not use the slogan of the egalitarian principle of Karl Marx. They would tend to come up with their own slogan. They won't call it a community pantry. They call it something like bayanihan.
Barangayanihan.
Yes, yes. Okay, so they would use, they would use different terms, but the essence is the same. But we cannot deny the fact that even if they appropriated it, on the other hand, they're engaged in redtagging, in demonizing. And when I say demonizing, as in the use of the word Satan to refer to, which is a little bit, very much uncalled for. But you can see how threatened they are, because even if the organizers of the community pantry, we can concede that some of them or many of them may be apolitical in nature, wittingly or unwittingly, they've exposed the inefficiency of the government, and it put the government on the defensive, which explains why for the past two midnight addresses of Duterte, he mentioned, he gave his own reactions on the community pantry. The most recent of which is that the barangay officials are better off distributing the goods donated by people, which again doesn't make sense because they're supposed to have been doing that in the past, right? So that's the essence basically of the community pantry.
So what we're getting is that combining most of your answers, sir, is that the community pantries are different in that they now represent our collective disgust 1 year into the lockdown, and as opposed to last year where the government has been saying that, oh, we have all of these resources, we are borrowing money, then now we know that the resources are already depleted. So for you to have an avenue to address basic necessity, as Sir Roland mentioned, which is hunger, in a collective manner that we have been championing ever since last year with all of the names of our laws na bayanihan, ito talaga yung nag-represent, na nag-resonate dun sa mga tao, especially because it's an on-ground level, amplified also, of course, by the media. So there is a resonance in terms of our collective feelings, and in terms of the media, since it's now amplifying these collective feelings. So saan po nanggagaling itong resonance na to? What do community pantries represent? Aside from yung galit, ano pa kaya yung tinatawag niya dun sa emotions? Yung hinihila niya dun sa consciousness ng mga tao?
I think on the one hand, it represents good governance, the antithesis of what we are having now as a kind of weak or even a failure of governance. We are seeing audit reports of donations, we're very transparent on community pantries, the number of cash donations, where it went, ano yung pinurchase, etc. So there is a kind of transparency in which it's not present in the 275 billion health emergency funds of Duterte. We're also seeing a kind of a need to partner with the barangays also. If you are even the Maginhawa Panty needed to partner with the nearby barangay officials or tanods to help facilitate the distribution and the lines and the social distancing, the protocols, etc. In the community pantries, along with the long wait in the lines, it's also kind of consciousness raising na hindi nagawa at the ground level in terms of the COVID pandemic. No? Very simple things, what to wear, how to wear the face mask and the face shield in public, the required yun, how not to spit or blow your nose in the air in public, na hindi nagawa kasi kahit ang gobyerno hindi naman nag-ground level, hindi naman nag-door-to-door sa panahon ng needed most in terms of community consciousness raising with regard to the pandemic, the virus, and ways to beat the virus sa kwan. Kaya sa labas ng subdivision ko, parating meron na lang blazing sound system na pinagagalitan yung mga tao, minumura yung mga bata, yung mga magulang nila, which of course will not work. Kailangan mo rin ng positive reinforcement dito at hindi takutin yung tao na mamamatay at pasaway kayo, i-label sila. So as trespassing, illegal subject of the one. Samantalang dito sa community pantries, malinaw na marangal ang pumila, marangal ang may pangangailangan, marangal ang tumulong, etc. So kung ano yung antithesis ba ng kakulangan or kasobrahan ng ating gobyerno, yun yung lumalabas sa community pantries. Pagkatapos nga, yung idea ng pagtulong sa various kinds of levels. At yung impact din ito, katulad ng pinoportray sa social media, yung isang lola na umiyak dahil kakala niya maubusan na siya ng makukuha dito sa pantry dahil malapit na magsara. At na-touch siya or na-touch siya nung meron pang maiuwi man lang sa pamilya niya. Yung excesses din ito na kumuha ng isang buong tray ng itlog na sensationalize. Kasi nga wala naman assurance sa mga kabalik sila. Ang reports ay 3 miles ang nilalakad. So around 7 or 8 kilometers ang nilalakad dito. Parang 8 beses ka naglakad sa oval, sa UP Oval, para lang makarating sa community pantry. At hindi mo pwedeng gawin yun sa panahon ng pandemic na araw-araw mong i-expose ang sarili mo at yung pamilya mo. Kaya may mga ganong klaseng lapses din. Pero at the same time, ay malinaw naman kapag nakita natin yung guidelines ng community pantries na establish nila na wag malungkot dapat yung mga organizers nito at nadismaya sa mga naubusan at sa reaksyon ng mga tao na naubusan dahil nga yun lang din ang kakayanan ng ini-establish na community pantry. So pag pinaliwanagan natin yung taong bayan sa antas na naiintindihan nila o sa wika na naiintindihan nila at sa traditional na pagkausap sa kanila na hindi sumisigaw at hindi tinataranta sila pero kinakausap sila bilang mga marangal na tao at mamamayan, ay naiunawaan nila ang issue dito sa community pantries at sa pandemiko habang sila ay nag-aantay.
In a sense, you can also say that it's a form of activism in its generic sense because you can see certain elements of resistance from people, even if mass gatherings, for example, are not allowed during the MECQ or ECQ, people would still go to the pantry, not because of, disobeying laws, sometimes, or, wantonly disobeying law. Sometimes they are forced to, circumvent certain regulations at the barangay level out of desperation. So in that respect, there's activism among the marginalized and the underrepresented. And for the so-called privileged ones who are in a position to donate what they can, they also go out of their house. And sometimes there is even anecdotal evidence showing that people from out of town would go to Maginhawa Community Pantry when other pantries were not yet fully set up at that particular time to just simply donate. Okay. Of course, we also have something to say about the predilection of some people to, just do what do you call that, ego feeding on social media, where they donate just because they want to post something on social media. So that's more or less the parallel of what Dr. Tolentino said about extreme cases where you see people getting trays and trays of eggs. And then people would gang up on them saying that they're being selfish or what. But of course, we have to understand that these are just simply nuances. For the most part, there is self-discipline among people. We can see there the footage of people, doing the distancing by themselves. You don't need marshals to constantly remind them or to castigate them to do social distancing. Why? Because people know the effects of the virus, and they know the importance of wearing masks, face shields, and doing physical distancing. But of course, the narrative will be quite the opposite insofar as the government is concerned, because even prior to the setting up of the community pantries, they've been blaming people for the spread of the virus, and they even touted themselves as being excellent in terms of handling the pandemic. They used that word. They were excellent. But therein lies the problem because we have a government that's out of touch with reality. And if we were to stretch the argument of Dr. Tolentino a bit further, it's not because of, well, it's because definitely the element of good governance may be seen in the community pantries, but it also exposes the absence of governance. Do we really have a president sitting in Malacanang right now? Sometimes that's the question that's commonly asked by people, because you hardly see him. And when you see him, he just curses his way through the night, blaming the Lima for the virus and all those things, and threatening to punch a former government official once he sees him. So, you know, if such government would continue to exist, then the form of activism in the community pantry would develop into something much higher. Because we have to consider the fact that because of the pantry, suddenly Marx is in the conversation right now because of his egalitarian principle. So that's why the government would really have to step up its handling of the pandemic. Otherwise, this kind of resistance and this kind of activism would evolve or develop into something that the government would not want to have.
Ayan, dami kong natutunan so far. But what I would like to also provide a comment on what Sir Roland mentioned a while ago on the consciousness setting of the community pantries, because I am also seeing community pantries give away sanitary pads and women inclusive necessities na hindi talaga kasama primarily dun sa mga ayuda na binibigay natin. So it's just a nice thing to see na meron kang pinapakita na ito yung mga bagay na kailangan ng kababaihan na hindi binibigay ng libre ng gobyerno, na kailangan din ng bayaran dahil lamang babae sila. And yung inclusiveness, and this is coming from what Sir Roland mentioned a while ago on good governance, because a lot of people, at least in my field, would say that this is mutual aid going on in community pantries. It's very inclusive. Sabi nga ni Sir Roland, marangal tumulong. So it's very telling of how we have been operating on the concept of ikaw magbigay, ikaw yung may kaya eh. Ikaw yung mga nasa laylayan kayo, tagatanggap lang kayo. So it's also a way of empowering those in impoverished communities na meron marangal pumila at may kakayahan din silang tumulong, meron silang iaambag at dito sa laban natin sa COVID-19. That's what Sir Danny mentioned a while ago, diba? So, bibigay yung may privilege, tapos yung mga nasa laylayan naman, they also give what they can. So, it's also a way of re-examination of one's personal life. So, yung quote mismo na magbigay ayon sa kakayahan, kumuha ayon sa pangangailangan, it calls for re-examination. Ano ba ang kailangan ko? Ano ba ang kaya kong ibigay? So it's a reflection of how we stand. At it's an answer na dun sa lagi tinatanong sa atin, ano ba ang bag mo? And we see the community pantries are working. May ilang linggo na din simula nung nagsimula yung movement, and it's still here. And one of the prevailing questions that I would have to ask you, Sir Danny and Sir Roland, is, are community pantries sustainable?
Well, technically, they're not supposed to be sustainable. And as mentioned a while ago, they're palliative measures that's supposed to address the immediate need for hunger. If government would be competent enough to provide the necessary aid, you wouldn't need community pantries to begin with. But right now, we're seeing the possibility of it extending even beyond 2022, of course, depending on who gets elected into office. So that's also a reflection of the state of affairs that we have right now. Pantries are supposed to be there just simply to provide some temporary relief. But it's not as if people will get rich or they will, just simply, forget about getting a job and just simply line up every day to feed their children. We cannot have that kind of a quote-unquote lifestyle, because we have to ensure that people will really eventually get their lives going, and government would have to play a major role for that. Just on the simple issue of ayuda, for example, 1,000 pesos per individual or for a maximum of 4,000 per family, I doubt if this would be enough, even if the presidential spokesperson said that 1,000 is enough for a 1 week survival of a person. I sincerely doubt it. But right now, the call, I understand, is to provide 10,000 pesos per individual. Now, if you look at the budget allocation for the NTF-LCAC, whose existence, is just simply dependent on the number of people and individual and groups that they red tag, it's 19 billion. So if you do the math, you can provide for 1.9 million people 10,000 pesos each, only if you realign that particular budget. And that would partly explain why the movement to defund NTF-LCAC is, gaining ground. A good number of senators support such a measure. What's that got to do with the community pantry? Actually, if only you can provide that kind of aid, the pantries, I'm not saying that it will die a natural death. There may be no need for it in the first place because somehow 10,000 pesos, it may not be enough to tide a particular individual over for, let's say, 3 weeks or 4 weeks, but at least there is some relief that they can get. So to answer your question, it's not supposed to be sustainable. It's not supposed to be permanent, rather. But right now, we may be moving in that particular direction, not because you have media hogs or you have, fame horse manning the community pantries. It's mainly because of the government being inefficient.
I think we can compare community pantries to a kind of relief operation after a natural disaster, which means that may shelf life lang siya for people to be able to move on to the next level, which is to resume their old quality of life. So, katulad ng sinabi ni Danny, hindi nga siya permanent na one. Kasi dapat ay i-assume ng gobyerno yung relief operations para ma-clear yung mga kalsada sa natural disaster, bumalik yung kuryente, tubig, makalikas pabalik sa mga bahay nila, etc. Pero ang nangyari nga dito, dahil ito nang humahaba, at habang humahaba, lalong nag-intensify yung kakulangan ng mga tao na to cope up with inadequacies of public services, no? Even access to basic human needs, ay na-intensify talaga yung inadequacy or even what we can term now as a failure of governance. We have a failed state. It does not work. After a year and a half, pinangako ni Duterte, vaccine is the solution. Ngayon ang buong mundo nagva-vaccinate na, like, tapos na sa mga herd mentalities nila sa tungkol sa vaccine, ay tayo ay wala pa sa 3% ba? Wala pa sa 3.3% pa lang na nabavaccinate sa Pilipinas. So kailan ito i-roll out? Pag bago mag-eleksyon para ma-ensure na yung partido niya, ang partido ng kasalukuyang presidente pa rin ang manalo sa May. Parang pinoprolong din itong government, yung situation natin ng failed governance or failed state. Para nga sa magaganap, importanteng national event na magaganap, na balak pa nga sana nilang i-postpone at mag-hold over na lang sila sa power in 2022, magaganap sa May din. So the countdown begins now, or for them, it has already been ongoing since the time they assumed position. Malaking kakulangan dahil bottomless ang hunger. Hindi ito mapupunan na palliative solution on the nation, everyone. Dahil habang nagtatagal, people will also be strained. Magkakaroon din ng fatigue sa donation sa philanthropy sa ginagawa nila. Dahil hindi naman sila ganung kalalim din ang mga wallets nila, laman ng mga wallets nila. So, something's got to give. Either dumating yung vaccine in the nick of time para maka-resume tayo ng classes at magkaroon ng semblance of offices and back to normal na klase ng buhay, or mag-eleksyon. At parang hold out talaga, hostage ang vaccine at this time. Para nga lang sa timing nito na ma-weaponize nito for the national elections in 2022.
Parang nagkakaroon nga, di ba, sirs, ng double standards. Kumbaga, so they say that, as Sir Danny mentioned, they label their own pandemic response as excellent. Na ayaw na umamin ng mga pagkakamali nila. But at the same time, they are the first ones to demand so much from community pantries that are citizen-led movements, like what happened to celebrities, a birthday celebration, na parang ang laki nung pag-castigate sa kanya dahil may isang nag-collapse at nabuwi ng buhay na hindi naman dapat pipila kung sapat lang yung ayuda na binibigay. So, sa community pantries, magpapadala na napakaraming mga police para i-ensure yung social distancing. But at the same time, pagbigyan ng ayuda dun sa social amelioration program, mas malala pang aberya kasi ang late, ang tagal na lang magbigay. And it's also frustrating to see that kind of double standard, like a year and a half into the pandemic. During the start of the pandemic, we were, I think, as far as I've heard, the only country that said, "Oh, we're just gonna wait for the vaccine," and then the vaccines are already being rolled out around the world. But here we are. Here we are letting people get away with jumping lines to get vaccinated, na lahat ng mga vaccines that we have so far, also all donations. So dapat binibigay natin dun sa mga nangangailangan talaga. So to go back to dun sa sustainability question and yung double standards, both of you, Sir Danny and Sir Roland, also mentioned the fact that the government has to step in. You don't need to depend on community pantry sustainability to be able to rid ourselves of poverty, especially amplified by this pandemic. But what's happening now is that instead of cooperating, they are actually co-opting in the form of barangayanihan and also antagonizing community pantries. We have seen, for example, Lieutenant General Parlade, the spokesperson of the National Task Force to End Local Communist Armed Conflict, or NTF-LCAC, label Patricia noon as a suspicious person, as a Satan. Yan. So what can you say about the response, these kinds of responses and antagonizing comments that Patreng specifically and the community pantries in general are getting?
To be honest about it, it's something that you expect from NTF-LCAC or Parlade in particular, because one advantage that all of us have here, because we're all based in the University of the Philippines, where Patreng graduated, at a certain point, if you've been teaching longer or much longer than I have, you know that Patreng used to be an activist. I mean, that's a given and that's public knowledge. And when, of course, you get wind of the fact that Patreng is getting, all this media attention, it's just a matter of time before she would get red tagged. It's just a matter of time before she would be accused of having some ulterior motives. And true enough, Parlade, just like, the usual script of red tagging, and Badoy, let's not forget Badoy. Right. Although, of course, there's a good Badoy and there's a bad Badoy. The latter one. Anyway, so Lorraine Badoy would go to the extent of bringing up her past as if it's something that she unearthed. But during the press conference that Patreng gave, if you were listening at the start of the press conference, she was already talking about her background. But with the way Lorraine Badoy framed her post, it's as if it was kept secret, it was due to her diligent data gathering, that she unearthed the fact that she was with the College of Fine Arts, that she was with Karatula, with Alay Sining, and all the other quote-unquote activist groups. So the way government, would go on an offensive as regards red tagging and on the defensive as regards, its mishandling of the pandemic, it's something that you would really expect. But still, it's good that there are certain government officials, just to be fair, who would want to, say that, this is getting out of hand. And that would partly explain why both Parlade and Badoy were given gag orders, not to talk about the community pantries anymore, which is a bit ironic. They're supposed to be spokespersons, but they're being told to shut up. That's something that must be magnified as well, because again, we go back to what Dr. Tolentino said about, bad governance or, mishandling of the pandemic. And let's not forget the fact that even the likes of Martin Dino would be contradicted by, the agency, by Jonathan Malaya, the spokesperson of the DILG himself, when Dino said that there's a need for a permit for the community pantry. Or on a not so related case, when Epimaco Dancing, an undersecretary, would say that the vice president is non-essential because she is lugaw. So, those things show the incompetence of the government, not only because of the red tagging, but also of the inconsistency with regard to policy or, even just simply analyzing or making sense of the situation. That's all.
Hindi ba itong red tagging naman is a kind of 1950s Cold War strategy in order to demonize anyone that might spread communism in any part of the world. And it's been 50, 70 years after at nire-resurrect pa rin ito nila Badoy, Parlade, Esperon. No? So ginagawa yun for two reasons. No? Una, for fear of the masses. The masses are an unruly lot. Mari silang, mas gusto nila, jolog sila ng masa para maging lumpen sila at suffer in their own decay. Or kasi ang masa rin, ang pwede mong i-politicize. At pag pinoliticize mo, they will be the bulk of protesters, the resistance movement, etc. So natatakot yung gobyerno sa politicization ng masa. And what is closer to home, closer to the heart, is the stomach. Pag na-politicize sila, dahil nararamdaman nila na nagugutom sila at ginugutom sila at may mga rekurso naman pala para maibsan man lang ang gutom nila. Pangalawa, yung nire-red tag din for fear of personalities that can become magnets for recruitment or even for the lighting of the fire or igniting the fires ng protest. No? Purposive ito kasi red tagging alone is not a kind of knee-jerk reaction. Talagang i-red tag ito dahil takot sila sa political transformation na maaaring mangyari sa isang collective form. So this leads to vilification. At pag na-vilify sila, katulad ng ginawa sa killing of activists sa panahon ni Arroyo, na ni-red flag ni Alston, yung UN Rapporteur for Human Rights, na systemic ito. Vilification leads to EJKs of political activists. Katulad nga nung nangyari sa panahon ni Arroyo. And this somehow provides also a kind of smoke, a kind of smoke cloud para yung mga corruption ng gobyerno, para yung mga yung kanyang mga kakulangan dito sa pandemic emergency na to ay mailusot. Kasi tuwing ginagawa itong vilification para talagang i-dampen din yung energies na mag-lead sa political transformation. Pero corollarily, nawawala sa usapan yung absentee president mo. Nawawala sa usapan na si Bongo ang humahawak ng balikat ng presidente habang siya ay binibigyan ng bakuna. Ang first lady ng gobyerno, ang nagpapatakbo ng gobyerno, etc. So ibig sabihin, at yung iba pang corruption, yung 15 billion na PhilHealth funds, nasa So ibig sabihin, ang dami-dami lang napapagtakpan kasi nga parating timeliness din ang pag-red tag nila at anyone and everyone that can spur public dissent on a collective basis. At marami naman talagang pwedeng gumawa nun.
So, yung pag-red tag dun sa community pantries, it's just, one of the phases of a system that this administration likes to use, that likes to demonize people who just want to make the world a better place, whether you are a certain part of a certain organization or not. And Ang laking bagay, I think because I know that Sir Danny is from the field of journalism, yung pagsabi niya na it's very ironic kasi spokesperson ka, tapos may gag order ka. That's very ironic. And that really highlights the danger and how widespread, disinformation and political maneuvering is here in the Philippines. That a lot of spokespersons, not just Badoy and Parlade, would be very much influential in upholding this smoke screen na hindi naman yan sila nagko-community pantry kasi kailangan ng tao kundi gusto lang nilang mag-recruit. Huwag kayong papa-recruit dyan, meron silang ulterior motive. Ang laking bagay yun, no? At saka asa na yung 15 billion? Kung kaya ng mamamayan na itawid yung gutom ng isa't isa sa gantong mga simple lamang na pagtutulungan and simple contributions, ano pa kaya yung gagawa ng budget ng NTF-ELCAC? Ano pa kaya yung magagawa yung 15 billion na hanggang ngayon hindi mahanap-hanap? At yung budget, of course, ng Office of the President na napakalaki rin. Kanina, Sir Danny mentioned yung sinasabi na lang, Vice President, it's non-essential. So, it's a stretch argument para i-attack yung one of the politicians who are being praised because of good governance and because of results from her initiatives. At ang liit ng budget anong Office of the Vice President as compared to other agencies of the government, but they provide results. So asa na yon? So right, so it's a smoke screen yung pag-red tag nila. But there are also other people, not necessarily spokespeople, not necessarily from the government, that have been said or labeled by a lot of social media users na red tagging. So there was a journalist who asked Patrengnon, are you a member of the Communist Party? And that sparked a lot of discussions on social media. So what do you think of that, Sir Danny, Sir Roland? Yung kahit hindi naman part ng gobyerno ay nasasabing nag-red tag.
Yeah. Of course, when you look at the definition of red tagging, technically, it should be the state actors doing the red tagging. But what is commonly ignored is the fact that there are certain enablers of the state who can also do red tagging. In other words, even if you're outside government, you may also be wittingly or unwittingly doing red tagging. And that would partly explain why we have to give a polite reminder to our colleagues in the media not to be used wittingly or unwittingly by the government in its red tagging spree. Now, that particular question, do you have links with the communist movement until now, or nagkaroon ba, or ano bang basis nitong red tagging sa'yo? That's the paraphrase of the reporter's question that became, a hot topic in the journalism community. It's like this. If you want to ask a particular question to a source of information, the basic rule of thumb in journalism is it should be research-based. So you have to find the proof of red tagging. And then if you're able to get the proof, you ask the source of information, okay, this is the proof that was provided by NTF-ELCAC or by Parlade. How would you react to that? The problem with the question is that it is very leading and it is very, very, for lack of a better term, accusatory. Because the day before the press conference of Patrengnon, the red tagging was only confined to the Maginhawa Community Pantry, not to Patrengnon herself. That's one. Second, what QCPD and the NTF-ELCAC did was to just simply share the posts of certain trolls accusing the Maginhawa Community Pantry of having some ulterior. So therein lies that particular problem with the question, because the question is addressed to Patreng and then she is being asked for her alleged links with the communist movement, which was only the accusation of certain anonymous trolls. So if the journalist would do that, you would be acknowledging some degree of truth from the trolls who are making such accusations. So we cannot ask questions based on dubious information. So that's where the problem lies. If you were to ask a person that question. And of course, Dr. Tolentino mentioned McCarthyism. That's the common question during the Senate hearings by McCarthy himself. Do you have ties with the communist movement? Have you had in any way contacts with known communists? You know, those questions like that. So sometimes if you are a real student of history, it will really send chills down your spine hearing questions like that. Let us remember, it's already 2021. And right now, you know, to be asked that question is, you know, there's no room for that anymore. And of course, let's not forget that the Anti-Subversion Act has been repealed as early as 1992. So technically, it is legal to be a member of the Communist Party. So you shouldn't be even asking that question, at least on the basis of legality. But of course, it's more extrajudicial than legal as far as the government would be concerned.
I think the spokespeople that do the red tagging, um, they they are able to red tag simply because media allows them to. I mean, media should
Right.
call them out. Much in the same way that the New York Times or the Washington Post have called out Trump every time, katulad ni Duterte na bastos lang ito. Bastos sumagot, bastos sa kung ano-ano accusation ng ginagawa. Kino-call out at binibigyan ng larger context. So, or minsan pinapatay na yung broadcast kay Kwan kasi it's not saying anything new. It's spreading hate. Etc. Pero sa atin, they allow the time of day dito sa deadly practice and ritual ng spokespeople natin para nga mag-red tag. When in fact, nga, gaya ng banggit ni Danny, ay moot and academic pag-red tag. It should have no effect, no bearing at good at this time in disclaiming good citizenship claims and etc. So, kailangan i-call out talaga ng media na it's another smoke screen kasi nga yung issue ng vaccine hindi pa rin or para mag-rampage naman si Duterte ngayon tungkol sa disclaimer niya na wala naman siyang pinangako about the West Philippine Sea claims sa China, etc. That we should be more thankful for that. Yun ang ginagawa sa at least sa US ng American press ay kino-call out yung presidente. At shut down yung kanyang press conference sa kanilang or they do not even cover the president. They will just say na sinabi ito ng presidente, pero ang talagang agenda na dapat tugunan ng presidente ay itong mga mas pertinent matters. At hindi ba, mas pertinent matter talaga ang issue ng pandemic management at vaccines at contact tracing kaysa bigyan ng time of day to na red taggers nito.
True. And it's very important, sir, right? Because journalism has an agenda-setting function. So the fact that you are asking this question means that you are broadcasting to the public that this is the question that should be asked. And I personally saw a lot of comments on social media saying, "Oh, this was a needed question. It's the elephant in the room. It's part of it's part of hardball journalism." But you are setting the agenda and you are basically saying, "Oh, we should be surveilling Patrignon. This is the issue that we should be looking at instead of looking at vaccines, rollout, contact tracing, asan na napunta yung mga inutang natin." And in order for the media and journalism in particular to respond to this, kailangan nilang they have to play into the larger context of accountability by calling out the president and other members of the government when they provide this information and they contribute to this information. So aside from calling out the journalists, calling out personalities in their reportage, how else can we exact accountability from this pandemic response that resulted in the need to set up community pantries in the first place?
Well, I think we can sum it up in 4 words. Public pressure works wonders. So short of saying that, activism is the key here. But some people may be allergic to activism because you might end up being red tagged. And when I say some people, we refer to those in power. But nevertheless, public pressure, whether you call it activism or just simply, pressure politics done on social media, it can really work. For example, there's a high-ranking university official who was forced to step down for reasons that we already know, because of the backlash that he got when he said, "I told you so," and blamed the community pantry for the death of someone who lined up, without asking why this, as Ash correctly mentioned, why this senior citizen had to go out of the house and then line up in the first place. So it's with pressure politics that we can see some change, no matter how short-term it may be. But of course, pressure politics can only do so much, in the sense that there are only some palliative, just like the community pantries, we would only just see certain palliative solutions. In the same way that the May 2022 elections can bring about some degrees of change, it's still limited change because it's possible that some well-meaning local officials or some well-meaning national officials or party list groups would end up in office, but they would just be a minority insofar as the political landscape would be concerned. So I think it has all to do with the long-term structural and systemic change that would need to be done, and that's where a higher form and a higher degree of pressure politics and activism would be most important. So the pantry can be seen as a starting point of resistance or activism, and actually it's good that we are introducing through the community pantry some lessons from Marxism without naming Marx himself. Okay, seeing the utility of egalitarianism even in the modern age. Because prior to the community pantry, I'm sorry to say, even in academia, sometimes people would reject the classics, the likes of Marx, Lenin, and the other usual suspects, for saying that these are 19th century thinking and that we're already in the 21st century, and therefore 19th century is so antiquated already. But the community pantry operates on a quote-unquote antiquated theory, right? Or antiquated discourse. But we can see some utility there. So actually, if we can further develop that particular mindset to introduce, important lessons of change, it doesn't matter whether it came from the 18th century, the 19th century, or to the current, thinkers, there would be some hope for change. But right now, at least in the short term, the kind of pressure politics that resulted in something positive, like the resignation of a university official who was clearly wrong in his claim. So if we can get, similar instances like that, then definitely there is hope for the future. That's all.
I think at this time, the government has effectively shut us down to do actual political protest. So most of the contestation right now is happening in social media. And the community pantry has succeeded in the first gag order of Esperon to his spokesperson, which is unprecedented kind of or the LGU heads reprimanding their local police heads and forcing the local police heads like in Quezon City to apologize for the kind of surveillance and redtagging that they did in the Maginhawa Pantry. So may successes niya, pero syempre, but it is a kind of embodiment talaga of a protest that needs to eventually transform into actual historical protest. I'm happy with what happened in May 1, where there is a reclaiming of the streets safely and using health and safety protocols to reclaim the street. At kung nakapunta ka na sa protest sa UP, it's more of a condensed kind of protest. Hindi na pwede yung 4 hours or pamorningan na klase ng protest. This one is really consolidated at an hour and a half, just to register a kind of a political mass of people. Yung talagang kinatatakutan ng gobyerno na nagpoprotesta at naghahanap ng political transformation, social transformation. Kailangan irehisko pa rin yun. So, at yung nangyari sa May 1, where it was echoed in Negros and other key cities and provinces in the country, is a kind of manifestation that we should eventually reclaim the streets and actual historical claims and protests that of the old normal na klase. Kasi nga, itong ginagawa natin sa social media, these are all rehearsals that may result in a kind of guilt complex dito sa mga tao, or dahil si Joy Del Monte mahilig din naman sa social media, I should be more conscious of this kind of criticism. That's the swelling of criticism. But in the end, of course, the more pertinent questions of social justice, in the way the pandemic is being mismanaged, rollout of vaccines needs to be echoed more or less in a kind of trajectory that leads to actual social change. Alam naman natin ngayon na kahit may mga public, kahit gusto natin magbigay ng vaccine pantry, halimbawa, kung gusto natin mag-take off yung the idea of food lang, ngayon pati vaccine and other kinds of pharmaceuticals na initiate naman sa UP ng isang pantry doon na may pharmaceutical products. Hindi ka pwede mag-import na hindi mo inaalat yung 50% ng i-import mo sa gobyerno. Hindi mo alam kung saan dadali ng gobyerno yung vaccine na yun. So if you want to import 1,000, for example, vaccine for your workers or for your community, no, you need to purchase 2,000 vaccine that are available out there. And everything needs to go through the government permits. Sila ang kukuha. So everything would likely be bloated in terms of costs, rather than the more expensive one like Sinovac would be in the purview of what the government will import, rather than yung 600 pesos na available at mas mataas yung efficacy in terms of one. So kahit na may mga higher stakeholders na gusto magkaroon ng ganitong klaseng initiative, hindi nila magagawa. So things need to be changed. At parang ang ginawa talaga ng gobyerno, nilagay lang tayo sa corner, pinate tayo sa corner na at in-hostage tayo at magantay na lang tayo sa kanya. We can only speculate why. Bakit pinoprolong itong agony natin at bakit parang kinakalibrate nga, or to my mind, for 2022. Samantalang pwede na nga tugunan ito even with a kind of local initiative at the ground level na klase na to also provide a safety net for the most vulnerable, or even for the business as usual mode of getting your workers in to be able to serve in fast foods or do garments na in very restricted places katulad ng mga warehouses or factories that they do work.
Combining lang the questions of Sir Roland and Sir Danny, based on personal observations also, I see that pressure politics is working. We now have, different politicians doing unprecedented work, calling out their calling out colleagues in the government also. But I would have to also agree with Sir Roland that we have to look beyond that, and there is a larger context to that. Elections are coming. We see previous allies calling out one another on social media. And why didn't you do that when you were in the position? Why didn't you do that when you were the ally of the president? Why are you only doing this now when you see that pressure politics is working, that people's discontent towards this government and towards this administration is growing stronger by the day, as long as the community pantries are there as proof of government inefficiency and government incompetence. And speaking of workers needing to get vaccinated, I was just told yesterday by a friend that other countries like Singapore, for example, does not recognize Sinovac in their vaccine passports. If you want to go there and work post-COVID, if we can imagine such a world, a post-COVID world, then you would have to get vaccinated either by Pfizer or by Moderna. because Sinovac is not being recognized by other countries as vaccine of enough efficiency for their country, which is the preferred vaccine here in the Philippines in terms of the government. So this is already my last question for you, Sir Danny and Sir Roland. Given all that we have talked about, how do you see community pantries, at least in the near future?
I would hope that it be sustained because it's a kind of memorialization of a people's initiative and a kind of resistance via comparison of what the government does not do and what people's initiative can do even on a very, very basic level. So kung ito lang ang kayang gawin ng gobyerno at ito yung kakulangan niya, ito naman yung kayang gawin ng mga tao with very limited resources, etc. And hopefully, in this kind of resistance via comparison, we get to also question yung mga nawawalang funds na corruption, yung mga budgets ng offices na do nothing good na klase ng offices and personalities para kumalat itong initiative ng community pantry. So I hope it sustains itself for the longest haul as a kind of registration of a memorial na eto tayo sa panahon ng incompetency ng gobyerno ay nagkaroon ng ganitong shining moment of a kind of people's initiative that has that eventually flows to other kinds of initiatives and accountability.
From an academic perspective, we hope that the pantries would be a springboard for, highlighting the relevance of Marx and other thinkers, progressive thinkers, because actually right now it's a welcome development that it would appear that no one is opposed to the egalitarian principle. So there are other lessons that we can learn from Marx, and I'm sure Ash can spend the whole day discussing it, given her expertise. But
Sure.
Kaya mo yan. Anyway, but that's the academic dimension. Of course, from a more journalistic dimension, which I teach, we hope that media would play, a major role in terms of highlighting, what's relevant and what's important to the people's lives. I mean, red tagging has no room in discourse because red tagging is the highest form of fake news. There's no evidence, and red tagging, lest we forget, can get you killed. As in the case of Portia, Echanis, Berna, so many people, Malayaw, and off the top of our heads, we can think of a long list of people. Even during the pandemic, let's not forget Carlito Badion, who helped in the Graciano Lopez Haina Community Journalism Workshop of UPCMC. Even our own college was red tagged, right? So sometimes that's the reality that we have to deal with. And the media would be better off highlighting more the lies that go with the red tagging. I'm not saying that they should not discuss red tagging, but don't give space anymore to these fake news peddlers. Just stick with the truth tellers, those who can provide evidence-based argumentation regardless of their political ideology. It doesn't matter whether you're leftist, rightist, or centrist. For as long as you're evidence-based, maybe you can be given some space in the media. But if you're someone like Parlade or Badoy, which is ironic, they are fake news peddlers, but they are spokespersons at the same time. So therein lies that quandary with regard to appointments in government. So the pantry, of course, inherently, whether we like it or not, it will become permanent because of it seems to be it may become permanent because of the mishandling of the pandemic. But of course, again, on a practical level, we hope that it can transform into something more pronounced, into something more defined, into a mass action that can really affect systemic change. Because sometimes if you look at movements, for change around the world, sometimes it starts with a very, very seemingly petty issue, and then it elevates into something big. So we hope that the pantry could take on that particular transformative character in the near future, preferably before the elections. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time, Sir Danny, Sir Roland, to discuss community pantries with us. So if you have any announcements, you may give them now for our viewers.
dahil meron tayong dearth of materials about what's happening, there's a lot of online programs that are available out there. Alter Media produces videos and talk shows that are available online. So timely talk shows by Inday Barona and Luis Chodoro. I think even Danny does interviews for Alter Media programs. So, we also have an online literary program called Pan and Ganap. Pan is a discussion of writing in the time of pandemic, and Ganap are literary performances spurred by pieces written during the time of pandemic, and they're from the UP Likaan Creative Writing Center.
Okay. So I thank Roland for mentioning Alter Media. Just a disclosure, both of us are founding members of Alter Media, so I don't need to mention the part about Alter Media, but I should mention that Bulatlat, as a member organization of Alter Media, regularly comes up with relevant articles. I understand that Roland writes a column there also, so that we can learn more about Philippine reality. As editor of Media Asia, I invite also the public to visit the website of Taylor and Francis Group, Routledge Taylor and Francis Group, to check out the latest issues of Media Asia. We're ahead of schedule, so the June issue is already out. The issue title is Rundown on Lockdowns and Crackdowns, that seek to address certain aspects of lockdowns and crackdowns, not just in the Philippines, but across selected countries in Asia. As convener of Contradaya, we are now in the thick of preparing for the 2022 elections. So please visit our social media accounts and our website if you want to volunteer for Contradaya, because we need to prepare for the elections to ensure that there will be transparency in the coming elections, and of course to help in our advocacy for voter education, where one particular focus would be how to handle fake news. So we want to encourage people to join this particular initiative. Thank you.
Thank you again, Sir Ron and Sir Danny. So for our viewers, what are your thoughts on the community pantry? Let us know in the comments below. So if you want more content like this, be sure to leave a like and hit that subscribe button. Hope you enjoyed. Once again, this is Presto, and this is the second episode of Usapang Sosyal. Thank you very much for watching.